Perfect.
Welcome to the compost pile. I am so privileged and happy today to sit with my dear friend Amy, Dr. Amy Nolan, who I first met some years ago, and as our lives intersected. And I'm so happy to have Amy, who is a superb connoisseur of the written word and understands languaging and its effect on us spiritually in this age of posthuman awareness. And Amy has graciously agreed to sit and talk with me about a few of our favorite things today. So, Amy, welcome, and thank you so much for coming and taking the time. And also, if I could invite you just to talk a little bit about how you've been composting yourself over this last year, and where you've come from, and what you're becoming.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure, always a pleasure to talk with you. And these are subjects that are, of course, very dear to me. Um, and I love the term composting in terms of its what it means elementally in the world, and also its proximity to the word composing. And and sometimes when we leap into the unknown, it is kind of like you're composing yourself and as well as composting. And I took a big leap recently after 30 years of teaching in higher education. I opted to step away from my position as a full professor at a small liberal arts college where I'd been teaching for 17 years. And there were a number of factors that led up to it, but I think part of it was remembering something my mom said years ago, um, that if you want to do something in your life, you that's just a dream that you have or something that means something to you, do it now, don't wait. And I've always wanted to just have a life where I could write and create and see what happens. And I'd been working for a very long time in the conventional sense. And I think I was just really tired and I needed to find a different approach to just living. And well, it involved taking a leave of absence and then deciding that I didn't want to come back. And that was kind of a heart in your throat kind of a letter to write. But people were very supportive, and I took that leap. And then my husband and I decided to also leave the state of Iowa and move to Ohio to be closer to his mom. And then she left and moved in with his sister in Oregon. And so we're here. We're just here making this place ourselves, and we've downsized and just doing our art and our writing and just kind of waking up each day and looking at what are we going to do now, like what's up for today. It's more of a process of being born maybe, or um, also like, yeah, composting, looking at the things that we took with us, deciding what we want to keep, what we want to leave behind. And I'm still very much in that process. So it's exciting though. It feels good.
Yeah, that is good. That is good. And Amy didn't mention, but she's an artist.
Yeah.
she's been producing these creative works of art. I want to talk about those maybe a little bit later on, and see where life is blooming for you.
Yeah, I've been doing collage and I've been doing it for years, but it really took off as soon as we moved here. So yeah, and it's been feeding into my writing in really interesting ways. But yeah, we can talk more about that. Um,
Yeah, yeah, excellent. Well, I want to jump right in today to talk a little bit about your fascination with decay. And I
mhm.
know that you and I have talked about this on a number of occasions, but I want to pull out just one line um, from an essay that you're currently working on, and how maybe you can unpack this a little bit for our viewers. You say
Mhm.
the shape of my thinking was created by a sense of disintegration, how things we love eventually disappear, slide, and fade away. I
Mhm.
wonder if you could just talk about that a little bit, that process of decay and why that why that really does hold interest for you.
That's a great question. So, decay and death and dying um, have always held a kind of fascination for me. I think um, I I grew up surrounded by a lot of loss. You know, my father died when I was very young, and it left a huge imprint on me. And I became fascinated by the mystery of death and um, witnessing a lot of grief around me and being afraid of it. Um, but for some reason, I decided to walk toward that fear. And later it developed into an interest in love of horror films and horror movies, or horror stories, I should say, because for me, horror as a genre takes up that mystery and explores it. And many horror stories are actually stories about grief. And later, much later, when my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and before that, my beloved cat, Ruby, um, the situations were strangely parallel in that I didn't want them to leave. I did not want them to go, and they kept slipping through my fingers. And um, I tried to hang on as much as I could. And there was a certain point where I realized, I think all of us come to this point where you just have to let go, because to want someone who's already dying to be free of suffering and to essentially die is a compassionate and loving thing. And that was really hard for me to realize and learn. And I remember a quote from one of my favorite television shows, 6 Feet Under, where it's a story about a family that runs a funeral home, and then their lives and everything. And one of the clients that comes in who's lost someone is crying, and she says to one of the workers at the funeral home, she says, why do people have to die? And the character says, to make life important. And I feel like all of the things that we want to hold on to, all the things we love in our lives, whether they're animals or people or places, trees, they mean so much to us because we know that they're temporary. They're going to die, and we're going to die. And it's such a basic thought. I know I'm not the first one to think that and feel that, but for me, coming to that realization in a visceral way made me think about all of the other things that I touch and have contact with every day. And especially when you start to become aware of your own mortality, um, whether you have a health issue or undergo surgery or you're just getting older, um, you realize like how precious and temporary it all is. Um, and decay is appealing to me because it's such a physical representation of what happens. It is the disappearance, the process of disintegration and disappearance. It doesn't mean that, for me anyway, decay means that um, something transforms into something else, like with composting. Um, and so my question is sort of how can we be nourished by the idea of decay? And so I connect that to analog objects, for example, that break down and show us how to feel time with the way that the way that they decay, the way that they become um, useless. But there's a beauty in that uselessness, um, for having touched and had some kind of sensual contact with that object. So yeah, there's a lot in that. I
Yeah,
realize.
yeah, there's a lot in that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering, what do you think in terms of, what's happening in the world today? I mean, we see people who run away from decay. I mean,
Mhm.
the very notion of it is horrific.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in terms of, our cultural awareness of
Mhm.
impermanence or decay, or composting? It might be putting the best possible spin on it, but we definitely seem to have an aversion to
Mhm.
that which disintegrates and grows old and rotting and dies.
Yeah.
And what are you noticing in terms of this current context? How are people dealing with this?
Well, I think a couple of things are happening. One, there's the ongoing, I think, disavowal and even repression of all those things in certainly American culture, but maybe Western culture in general. Um, just looking at the way we treat elderly people generally in our society, and the way we look at disease and dying. When my mom was dying of cancer, I remember the oncologist said when he sent her home to call hospice, "You are not achieving quality of life." And I thought, wow, it posits death as a failure on yeah, and I don't think he intended it that way, but the language made it sound like she was failing because she's dying. She's failing to achieve quality of life. And the language we use around things like cancer, like it's a battle and it's a war, and we, you know, use that language a lot to describe beating back the clock and beating back age and anything that hints at vulnerability, um, and decay and disintegration, of course, are part of that. But if we look at it as being just part of life, it'd be amazing how much different our world would be. I do see though, I mean, just in my lifetime, I've noticed more recently more people. Um, it's not a big number, but I have noticed more people talking about things like eco burials and um, looking at composting and other forms of treatment of waste as part of helping the planet. Um, I mean, obviously, with climate change and everything going on with that, it's forcing people to be confronted with decay and dying and death, and it's in our faces. And I think it's an opportunity. Um, yeah, people can either we as a society can either keep beating it back and denying it, or we can embrace it and go, okay, how can we fold this into our day-to-day life and our existence? Because I think grief isn't something that you get over, or you go through and get over on the other side of it. Grief is something that's part of just being alive. You carry it with you. And instead of beating it back, how can we embrace it and fold it into our existence? It doesn't take away from sadness and horror and all of those things we feel when something we love dies, but we lack right now, I think, the containers, the rituals collectively to help us deal with that stuff. It's all very individualized, and that's what I think makes people feel kind of lost.
Yeah, speaking of that, I mean, just the awareness of the digital age, and
Mm-hmm.
how, kind of this post-human context where we're all reduced to zeros and ones and the
Mm-hmm.
on or off, and that binary way of being that seems to, scoff at the idea of impermanence.
Mm-hmm.
How are people, really being able to cope with this? I mean, it seems that the digital, awareness in our souls right now is that things don't die,
Right.
right? And it's kind of, in a sense, it could be contributing to, this overall, human existential angst about, you know, as the oncologist for your mom said, failing at
Mm-hmm.
at achieving a quality of life rather than this is a healthy process that we engage in so that we can grow
Hmm.
anew in a different way. What do you see when we are all, completely enmeshed with the technology that is part of our human condition now? We're cyborgs.
Right. Well, I think I know it's neither, it's I'm not one of those people who thinks like all technology is evil or anything like that. I love my smartphone. I um it's been in processes of transformation, like moving, and then when my mom was dying and I was alone at my parents' house. Oh my gosh, I watched The Office on Netflix on my phone, like because I couldn't sleep. Um, and to me, it was a way to connect with people. And I think there's a fine line between having it be something that helps us and we can use um, to connect and be more and more in the world. It's an escape, but it's also something that we have become more subject to. And that's the hard part because when you don't feel like you have a choice, like having internet or being forced to have to pay with a phone, you can't pay cash in certain places, um, or being made to feel like you're falling behind because you're not on whatever um, social media platform. And as a writer in particular, I feel the pressure to have a website and have a Facebook page and do all these things that I am not interested in and don't feel comfortable with, um, that you never used to have to worry about. I think it's the feeling subject to and using it as a way to avoid the stuff of decay and composting and all of that. That is where we get into trouble because that world becomes more real than the world in front of us. Um, and I think people are aware. I think a person can be aware that that's happening, but still feel helpless, like, I don't know what else to do. I've got to do this. And I think that's the bind that a lot of people feel themselves in, is like they don't want to be subject to the, you know, the technology and the social media and all of that, but they feel like they don't have a choice. And that's the real struggle, I think.
Mhm.
That in and of itself, it's not bad. It's just a relationship with it um, is in trouble. It has been.
Yeah, and that feeling, as you said so eloquently in your essay, that once you are fully ensconced in the digital world, that feeling is everything is permanent. Nothing really goes
Mhm.
away. Nothing dies. It's
Right.
it's part of the divide, in a sense, of stepping away from that direct experience when we engage full sensorial engagement with the created world.
Hmm.
And stepping away from that, it becomes more and more implausible as a
Hmm.
real active participant in our awareness, in our activities every day, and in our decision making process.
Hmm.
If people are conscious of being you know wed to, for example, 151 minutes a day is what I'm reading that the average American adult spends on social media.
Wow.
And that's longer than the average amount of time one is said to spend with her or his significant other,
Hmm.
with children,
Yeah.
with definitely with nature.
Yeah.
So, what effect is this having on us spiritually, and
Oh
how do
man.
we understand,
Hmm.
healthy ways to, be integrating
Hmm.
the beauty of this, and kind of the real joy. You said, I love my smartphone. Man, I can get Merlin app on my cell phone
Yeah.
and turn it on, and it will identify, bird calls.
Yeah. Mine too. I started doing that and on plant identification. So like I'm trying to think of my smartphone as a tool, as a a way to sort of explore the world, explore the nature, you know, um, because I can't maybe carry a bird book around, or I want that sound to be identified. Um, I try to be mindful of that, and set boundaries and shut my phone off at a certain point during the day or have it off while I'm working. Um, I think one of the impacts that scares me the most about all this is the impact of mental health, the mental health for young people. Um, I, you know, for myself, I have a mental health condition, and I couldn't be on social media because it made me so anxious. Um, so I can't imagine having a mental health condition and feeling like you have to be on social media, like in the stress and the pressure that that gives you or presents for you. Um, and there have been times when I felt like, well, maybe I'm missing out because I'm not on it, but I finally got over that, and just kind of just relaxed into, well, this is my reality, this is my life. But for other people, I can't speak for everyone. Maybe some people think that for them, it is it does give them some sort of quality of life, I guess. But um, the things that I've read and learned point to a deep wounding with mental health in terms of how people compare themselves with each other, and just the images that they're bombarded with, and the isolation that people sometimes experience. And it's not my place to judge anyone for loving social media and all of that. But um, what makes me sad, I guess, is that there's so much in the natural world that is gently calling to our attention, saying, I'm here and wanting to connect. I do really feel like when I'm in nature, when I'm outside, it's a mutual experience. I'm not just reaching for nature, nature's reaching for me. And it's not something you can just talk about. You have to go out there and experience it. And I would love that for more people, especially young people.
Yeah. Yeah, said so beautifully, Amy. I think, part of one of the reasons that you and I connect so well is because of that mutual experience of,
Mhm.
being embraced by the creative world, and how that heals, how that has a possibility of healing for us. You talked a little bit about this, feeling of, being present, and having, creation be present to us. I wonder if you would talk a little bit about the emergence of hauntology as a
Mhm.
response to this digital experience that we're having right now in the post-human context. And
Yeah.
hauntology is a term I had not heard before I read your sources. So if you could talk a
Yeah.
little bit about what that is, and how you see it as a response to this digital age.
Well, hauntology is actually a term that comes out of the work of Jacques Derrida, who's writing about ontology, um, sort of the study of presence or meaning. Um, in French, they sound alike. Ontology and hauntology sound alike, and um, you know, one of the I think one of the great thinkers of the early 20th century. Unfortunately, he passed away at age 48. Mark Fisher, who's from Great Britain, he kind of took up that mantle from Derrida and talked about um, hauntology as being a kind of state of mourning the futures that we were taught to anticipate when we were young. And for him, he goes back to sort of a critique of capitalism or late capitalism, and that um, in the writings of Derrida, he talks about how capitalism will always be haunted by the fall of communism in the late 80s. And so he kind of talks about what's happened in culture since the late 80s in terms of his focus is mostly on music, but he also talks about um, just the culture in general and consumerism and how we consume art and literature and film, and how that's changed, and how there was a big shift when the digital world kind of took over, when the internet became more common, late 90s, early 2000s, where we start to notice, or he starts to notice, like it's becoming harder and harder to tell what year a certain kind of song came out. Like you look at the space between 2003 and 2010, he said there's not really that much of a difference in sound. There aren't those big schism, those big shifts like you get from decade to decade where you feel like everything's changed. Like, from the Beatles to the Talking Heads to punk to all of these movements that, especially movements in music that signify rebellion. Um, he says, as the 20th century started, that we've lost that thread, or there's not that dramatic shift that we saw earlier. Um, but to back up just a little bit, Mark Fisher was a music blogger. He had a blog known as K-Punk, and he wrote several essays for a music journal called Pitchfork. And one of his colleagues, Simon Reynolds, went on to do a lot more work on hauntology as it relates to music. But Mark's concern, or Fisher's concern, was about how hauntology is a kind of a state of mourning, and nostalgia, but it's not the same as nostalgia. It's kind of asking us to be in a state where we allow ourselves to be haunted by the past and inspired by the past. And it's kind of this looking back, um, to look at the way we used to perceive the future, um, as a way we can think about how we want to move forward. And he really struggled with this idea and unfortunately took his own life. Um, I want to say it was 2018. I could have the year wrong. It was 2017 or 2018. Um, and but his writings continue to be discussed and examined in terms of pop culture, how everything now seems to be a redo of something, or a sequel of a sequel. Um, it's There's a sense of everything's been done, and all we're doing is going back into the trash bin of history to kind of try to create new stuff. It's kind of a cynical view of things. Um, but one of the things I found fascinating about hauntology was the way it articulated the sense of like the physical nature of the analog, how it gives us something that the digital can't. Um, and he talks about it in terms of, or the sound of the crackle of a record and the physical experience we have when we connect to analog technology as opposed to the digital. Um, the quality of sound is different, um, and just the way we experience it in our bodies is different. So I'm really interested in that, and I'm still exploring it. But I also think there's something potentially depressing about hauntology because it doesn't really move us forward. And so that's why I was thinking about this idea of composting, um, or re-seeing or um, repositioning the past, um, to embrace being able to use the materials of the past in order to help us embrace the present and move forward into building a future that is completely um, I'm lacking words today. Uh, building working toward a future that exists uh, um, with decay and compost and as part of it, not as something that's underneath it or in spite of it.
hmm
Or
hmm
does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yes, it does. Actually, because I think, one of the things that you brought out so beautifully about Fisher's work is that, that sense of tactile and sensual apprehension
Mm-hmm.
of change, right? Which embodied selves have that, right? We,
Mm-hmm.
we we experience change in our bodies. We experience change in our foods as they're ripening and decaying. We
Mm-hmm.
experience that change in relationship, right? As we grow older and we, struggle for words and we're trying to, trying to touch each other in a sense without the ability to touch.
Mm-hmm.
And that's disturbing. I mean, for embodied creatures, that is
Mm-hmm.
disturbing. In that sense that, as we keep going forward, if we're going to make sense, if we're going to compost, we need to find a way back to full sensorial being. And the analog, you mentioned in your essay, I thought it was excellent. My students did this, and I'm sure yours did as well. They go searching for vinyl
Mm-hmm.
albums to play and go get the old 32 and get the needle, right. We had
Mm-hmm.
mom's 78s, and it
Mm-hmm.
was it was that very tactile way of putting the arm, holding it, putting the one arm to steady and putting the arm down with the needle and having it there's that and then when the record warps,
Mm-hmm.
right, or you've left something in the sun, or
Yes.
happens,
Mm-hmm.
that tape is never going to be the same. And we won't even talk
Totally.
about 8 tracks, right? But cassette tapes, I have millions of cassette tapes that are in some state of decay,
Yep.
and videotapes. I mean, you name it. But
Mm-hmm.
when you were talking about that, it just feels to me like one of the issues that we're having with this divide spiritual
Mm-hmm.
is that as we pull more and more away from tactile, sensual ways of apprehending and integrating, we're
Mm-hmm.
pulling further and further away from our own embodied being.
Yes.
And how is that gonna how do we compost that experience as
That's a
being
great.
disembodied, spiritual beings? How do we do that?
Mhm. Right. That's such a great question. Because indeed, one of the writers that I quote in my essay, Adam Harper, who wrote a beautiful long piece about hauntology, talks about the reach the reach toward the analog in a digital context reflects a quote melancholy frustration with the way things are unquote, and it's a longing for not just novelty, but for aliveness, for a sense of vibrancy, a sense of, you know, and I took it for granted when I was a kid. I didn't know, but I loved that feeling of that crackly noise right before the song starts, the first track on an album.
Uh-huh.
And then I'd sit there on the floor with the record, the sleeve, and I'd look at it as the music's playing and open it up and just kind of go into this sort of meditative state. And it's a completely different experience than downloading something on your iPod. And I do that too, but it's not that sort of almost like I would say spiritual experience of sitting on the floor and really experiencing music in that particular way. Um, And now I recognize it as that because of being so ensconced in the digital, I think, for the years most of my adult life. But um, I think that that's what people are seeking when they try to go back to um, the pre-digital time.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about with the music and listening to
Mm-hmm.
the albums and really having that kind of embodied crackle, that
Mm-hmm.
crackle experience is, I think of my favorite musical composer, Stephen Sondheim, who
Mm-hmm.
lamented, what happened in musical theater, when there's an intimate setting and the audience, is participatory
Mm-hmm.
as actors with the drama that's unfolding on stage. And that with the advent of the body mics,
Mm-hmm.
where the actors on stage now can kind of croon in a very, almost you're sitting right next to me sort of way. I don't have to project, right? I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
project my voice to the last evening. These are intimate theaters.
Right.
What's happened, he said, is that audiences become, passive, and they're being played to, but they're not being full-bodied, engaging participants
Right.
in that drama. So they're not integrating this in a way that has been.
Mm-hmm.
And as we become, more sophisticated with our technology, and he really did have, an issue with these body mics,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because of, that lack of, needing to sing and project, my expression, my voice, everything to, the last seat in the house. That there's that sense that, this is happening everywhere as we become. I'm noticing this, with what I do to help people find a home. We want more and more space around us. We don't like the intimacy of what we used to do, right? We share a bathroom with 5 other people or 10 other
Mm-hmm.
people. We share a bedroom. We share, our physical space all the time. We want all this space. That we have to
Mm-hmm.
have this space. And then as we're becoming more and more, you know, separate from each other, we have that sense of this is more real. This is more
Mm-hmm.
normal. And when I'm close and when I'm rubbing up against your shoulder, and it's, I can feel your breath, I
Mm-hmm.
can smell your breath, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's too much. We
Mm-hmm.
don't have that clear demarcation of where I am, who I am, and who you are, and it's too much in proximity.
Right.
And I guess, I mean, this is where, I want to kind of, just invite you to talk a little bit about, what composting is for the spiritual life. I mean, what are you seeing as you, go forward and you're composting your own life in a sense, right? What are you seeing for what we need to do this well, to integrate what we are as digital, cyborgs, the cybernetic
Mm-hmm.
organisms, enmeshed with the technological, and finding that we're no longer the center of the drama of human existence. We're definitely part of it,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not top billing anymore.
Right.
And what are you finding as this process of composting is unfolding?
Well, for me, I think first of all, I think having more conversations like this is really important. I think people want it, are generally longing for that kind of connection. Um, I definitely started to see it with my students before I left academia. At least for the time being, I might go back and teach part time. But for me, the composting is about being willing to let go of something that was good, something that um, maybe was holding me back from the next part of my growth or my journey as a being on this planet, and to kind of trusting that to let me move forward, and trusting that I'll know what to let go of as I move forward, move beyond it. And I was talking earlier about my art, which is collaging. And with collaging, what you're doing as an artist is you're taking scraps from other contexts, magazines, newspapers, books, and you're putting them into a completely new context to create another work of art. And it's completely original, and but it's got the pieces from all these different sources and different parts of different mediums. And I see that being very closely related to composting, because what you're doing is taking things that were once nourishing but now have been used up and are now ready to be disposed of, but can also be helpful in creating something new. Um, and on the one hand, each person has to figure that out for themselves, but on the other, collectively, um, maybe we can work on creating containers, figuratively, rituals, stories, um, activities that invite people into a space where they can talk through this and start to co-create, maybe, um, ways of taking this old stuff we don't know what to do with and creating something new out of it. Um, that would be my hope, and what I see being, I think, really important work as we move forward.
Yeah, and it becomes less scary, right? When we
Yeah.
do it together and we experience this profound change coming out
Mm-hmm.
of something that we have loved that might be holding us back or that no longer serves.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
seeing that, it comes forward, it grows again, and it grows
Yeah.
to something totally new, and that's an exciting thing.
It's like
Collaborative.
returning to the cycles of that nature teaches us and demonstrates for us every day. Even with climate change, those cycles are still there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Biomimicry for, you know, uh, adaptive change, right? And understanding seasons
Yep.
and really, entering into them and the joy as much as, oh, summer's waning, but autumn. And oh, autumn's waning. Well, what winter?
Yeah.
To be able to do that in a way that we can all co-create together
Hmm.
something truly beautiful. Um, well, Amy, I cannot thank you enough for coming and spending time today to talk about all this. And it's just you're a joy to me, and thank
Oh,
you for your outstanding work. I wanna leave
thank you.
by quoting you again. So grateful for your work in the world, and wanting to talk about your experience of composting. And this is I love the way that you put this, and if I can find it here, it's right toward the end of your essay. Composting, composting and slash composing is about this, finding the common thread between what makes us sad and letting it guide us to go deeper and to try to understand it and find out how to give it life by bringing awareness to it, holding it up to the light. When you're afraid, just stop what you're doing, sit still, and look around at every small thing. Give it your attention. Here, the warm brick leaning against my neighbor's house. There, my cat's white fur catching drops of light from the window. Now, the gentle veins in my aging hand typing these words as rain finally comes to break a drought. Now that is that is poetry for the soul. So thank you so much
Thank you.
again for coming today and sitting with us. And I just greatly appreciate you, Amy.
Oh, you too, Laura. It's been an honor. I just thank you again for reading it, and for this opportunity to share. And um, I'm so grateful for you.
Me too.